did you expect it to be just like that?
I thought it would be quick because I just felt that Babic would come out like a train. But actually, when I spoke to Dillian White earlier in the night, he basically told me they were going to try and box and take Johnny deep. So it was even more impressive because of how composed it was. It was great shot selection and punch picking rather than just swinging and like a novice. And that's because he's not a novice anymore. He came into the game as a novice, but he's establishing himself as a very, very good heavyweight who can punch. Who's got good shot selection, got a great chin, and he's a real threat. He's now 12 wins, 11 knockouts, and you've got to put this guy up there when you talk about other world heavyweight prospects around the same number of fights. Very impressive, and obviously commercially, no one can do what he's doing.
And where do you look at taking him next year? Obviously, we know that he can do the numbers now, but you mentioned the experience. What type of opponents are you going to look for to get him those rounds of experience?
You need opponents that can do rounds, but that's quite difficult, when he fights the way he does. Next time he headlines, which I don't know when it'll be, end of this year or probably January, February of next year, you need a name. Could be Adelaide, could be Dakers, could be Wardley, could be Clark. So you've got to be ready for those kind of fights. So the next 2 fights, which you have this year, will be really important to give him those rounds to make sure he's ready to headline again.
And then finally for me, we saw Dillian White here, but much earlier in the night than what we thought. Were there any discussions with Dillian about the future with him?
Not really. I mean, look, he says obviously he wants to get back into big fights. I think he said he's looking to fight in September. One more fight and then throw him in against anybody. So, he's still a big name and we'll see what happens.
Any pro boxing fans, just talk to us about the stoppage. Did you feel like the ref stopped it at the right point?
Well, unless you wanted to see terrible damage done to Alen Babic. I mean, he was completely gone. Whenever a fighter gets up and literally can't control their legs, you have to stop. You don't even wait for them to settle. You just stop the fight. Like, if you would have let that fight go on, it could have been a really, really nasty ending. And Alen Babic is a lovely man, and he's game as they come. Like, he'll always try and fight on, but the referee saved him from a horrific beating. And I'm very glad the fight was stopped.
I believe Bellew said on DAZN he feels like Fish is just maybe 1 or 2 fights off a Clark or a Wardley, and he preferred to see like a Adelaide or Dake or something like that. Do you agree? Or?
Yeah, I think he beats Wardley and Clark now. I honestly do, but I also think it's a risky fight, and as you saw tonight, we don't need to take really risky fights just yet. I mean, there was a risk tonight, but I felt very confident it was the right fight for him. We just got to make sure we get those fights in between those kind of fights to make sure that he's ready, and we'll take those fights when he's 100% ready, and when we do, we'll fill up the O2 or wherever it'll be.
Finally from me next week, Jaron Ennis against Avanesian. What can fans expect from that?
Well, just a top 5 pound for pounder. An incredible atmosphere in Philadelphia, and a star should have really been born. So reborn, if you like, or whatever he is in American boxing, and we're on an incredible run at the moment, especially in America, and next week's going to be really special.
Eddie, Alen Babic is brought in, meant to be a considerable step up for Johnny tonight. Were you expecting a little bit more from Babic for him to provide more of a test for Johnny?
I knew that when Johnny landed clean, Babic would be in big trouble because Johnny's punching really hard at the moment. I was surprised a little bit how clean he hit him early, because one of the things Johnny's struggled with in the past is that accuracy with all the shots, but everything was perfectly placed. If the hands were here, it was around the top of the head. When the hands came down, it was one through the middle. And that was what impressed me the most. And the thing is with Alen Babic is he's a small heavyweight, and when he gets hit hard by a big, strong heavyweight, he's not going to be able to live with it, and that's what you saw.
Now that Johnny stepped up and fought a Babic, how do you manage it from here? The fans, after seeing him destroy Babic like that, there's going to be a lot of clamour for more big names. How do you manage it from here, and what sort of opponents are you going to be?
When you headline, again, it is a big name, but it's what you do in the middle, so you don't want to put the pressure on all the time for him headlining. So when he fights on the undercard, he doesn't need to be in a Wardley or a Clark or whatever. So that's really important now that we use those fights to get the experience that he needs and the rounds in the bank.
And just finally, Eddie, Anthony Joshua, massive fight against Daniel Dubois, one that's really going to get the British fans excited. Is that really a bit of not a semi-final, but is the winner of that fight looking at potentially the winner of Usyk and Tyson Fury?
Because the winner of the other fight can become undisputed by fighting them. Obviously Usyk's already done that, but especially if it's Tyson Fury, makes the fight huge. But the winner of AJ against Dubois, the natural fight is to fight the winner of Fury Usyk.
Julian, for Title Sports Network, Eddie, you mentioned Johnny Fisher and compared him to one Henry Cooper. Could you just expand on that?
Yeah, it's actually Derek Chisora I had a conversation with. He said he reminds me a little bit, the popularity of like old Henry Cooper. Sort of good stand-up little puncher, and obviously I never really like comparing people to greats, but the popularity of this young man is like something we've never seen before. I mean, that was his 12th fight tonight. Even AJ wasn't headlining in his 12th fight. Like AJ headlined against Gary Cornish. I think it was his 15th, 14th fight, something like that. And obviously AJ sold a lot more tickets to the casual fans. But in terms of physical ticket sales, I've never worked with anyone who sells as many tickets as Johnny Fisher. Like, that atmosphere was wild. Imagine everyone going home on a train after that. Absolutely pumped. England have won. Johnny Fisher's won in 35 seconds, and they'll all be back. But we got to get it right with Johnny. There's no tearing rush, and there's definitely no need to make a mistake.
Let's talk about your reaction to that England game as well. We all saw the reaction of the whole crowd, but it was a good atmosphere and actually a great night.
Especially a penalty shootout.
Yeah, exactly.
To win on penalties, because we never win on penalties, and it's just we look really composed. We score all 5 penalties. The performance was much better than last time. Who's to say we can't get it dead right in the semis, or nearly dead right, and they're dead right in the final? Tough game against Holland, but I thought the boxing actually worked really well. I mean, we were very lucky with some of the fights, like they went points when we thought they wouldn't go points and stuff like that. But I'm not saying we'll do it again, but actually got away with it, and it was good fun.
Yeah, one more thing from me. Fraser Clark, Fabio Wardley, you've mentioned those names and you said you think Johnny could beat them.
Yeah.
What about Johnny's style do you think is better than theirs?
I just think Johnny has a better engine. I think he punches really hard. I mean, he punches harder than Fraser Clark, in my opinion. Fabio's a sharp shooter, but that fight will take a lot out of both men, particularly Fabio Wardley. And I'm not saying it's like they're 50-50 fights, but I just think he can beat them. But when we take that fight, they won't be 50-50 fights. That's the plan. So we just need that little extra experience.
Maisey Rose suffered defeat tonight. I think everyone was pretty clear what the next step for her was going to be Chloe Watson. What is sort of the path now that I suppose the Watson fight is off the table for Maisey Rose? Yeah,
I mean, I thought she was disappointing, particularly in the first half of the fight. And there's no point beating around the bush. Like, when a prospect gets beat, you got to tell the truth, and that you say to Maisey that wasn't good enough for you because you're a very good fighter and a special fighter. And in the first half of that fight, you weren't good enough. Second half, you were much better, and I thought the second half of the fight was quite close. But she'd already lost the first 4 or 5 rounds, so the fight's over at that point, really. So you got to learn, and the key is how you come back. We'll support her 100%. She'll have a little rest, come back, get a win, and then dive back into another fight, whether that's a rematch, whether that's Chloe Watson. But, you only get so many opportunities to lose, if you like. And she's got to make sure she improves and comes back stronger.
You mentioned Australia and a few other areas there for Johnny Fisher, but when you see that crowd tonight and you see sort of the buzz, is there not part of you that's like, we could make the Copper Box almost like the home of Johnny Fisher?
Yes, but if you make that mistake, then you end up matching him wrong, because what you can't do is you can't come here and fight Marius Wack, right? Because it's just shit. So, and I don't want to put shit on as main event. So it's like Marius Wack's a good fight for Johnny Fisher to learn, maybe a fight or 2 ago, to get some rounds, maybe. Yeah? But that can sit 3 fights down a card, no one moans, and you get away with it. We need, not Marius Wack, but we need a couple of those fights before we headline again. Because when we headline again, we'll probably headline against Adelaide, maybe the loser of Fabio Wardley against Fraser Clark, maybe even the winner. But if we can get 2 or 3 fights against someone that will give us some rounds, I'll be a lot more comfortable going into those fights, because what I don't want to do is just start headlining against anybody, because it's just like, you've got to make it a special night, and you've got to make it not every 3 months, every 5 or 6 months. So I think he'll headline again here probably January or February or something like that. But the opponent will be right, and we'll be 2 more fights down the line against better opposition.